Welcome, everyone who's joining us to the Lead with Talent podcast. My name is Dom Jones. For those who do not know me, I'm the founder and principal consultant of Lead with Talent, where we equip leaders and organizations to leverage their talent to achieve purposeful impact. We do that through consulting, through leadership development, through training, and through conversations like we're going to have today with amazing experts. We're going to be talking about conflict and fighting and all of that stuff in organizations. For those meeting Suman for the first time, she is the consultant, a facilitator, a speaker, and specializes in areas like DEI and leadership, and what we're discussing today, the topic of conflict resolution. This is an area that I know you specialize in to help empower organizations to do this well. Tell us a little bit more about the work that you do and how you got into this in the first place.
Sounds great. Thank you, Dom, again, for having me here, but for really bringing this topic to the forefront of conversation. So a little bit about me. As you mentioned, I'm a leadership development and DEI consultant, but I really focus on supporting individuals and organizations through conflict management and how that can improve culture in the workplace. And I do all of that with this DEI lens, diversity, equity, and inclusion. So all of this started literally as a young child. I grew up as a daughter of immigrant parents. And as a child of immigrant parents, we are constantly navigating different cultures, right? The US culture, American culture, and for me, the Indian South Asian culture. Also, generational perspective. All of that really led me from a very early age to understand the importance of communication, empathy, and how we bridge gaps between people. So all that led me to getting my master's in conflict analysis and resolution. I did mediations, worked for a mediation company for about 10 years before I purposefully left my work to raise my children. I have a sophomore in college son and a freshman in high school daughter. And so, it's always easier, I say, to manage conflict outside of the house than it is when you are personally invested in that conflict. But I'm hoping that I have shared some of this is going to sound odd, but my love for conflict with my children, because really conflict, if it is managed well, leads to incredible change and incredible growth. But the challenge is we need to know how to manage the conflict. So, in my professional world, I work with nonprofits, for-profits, associations, membership associations, really helping leaders and teams address these complex challenges that happen in the workspace. And what I've really learned, and it goes back, is that conflict is something that we all try to avoid. We avoid it like the plague. If we manage it properly, it can be that powerful catalyst for growth, for innovation, for collaboration, for strong relationships. And that's really where my passion sits, is helping organizations tap into the positive, powerful aspects of conflict.
I love that work, and you are spot on in that. Typically, my assessment has been, let's avoid it at all costs, and any sign of conflict is a sign of a quote unquote bad culture. But in reality, conflict is necessary and speaks to the health of a culture. My first time really observing what we're talking about now, the need to do conflict well, was years ago. I was in a role of a chief of staff, where I wasn't directly responsible for driving the success of the org, but I was responsible for ensuring all of the stakeholders were aligned in the broader priorities and were moving forward collectively. And I recall sitting in so many conversations where I could pick up on the fact that there were some arguments that we needed to have. There were some debates and discussions that we needed to have, but often we stepped around it because of fear of of conflict. So thank you for drawing out one that is necessary. In an organization, is there a such thing as a difference between good conflict versus bad conflict? And how do we know the difference?
Oh, thank you for that setup. And let me step back to the story that you shared.
Mm-hmm.
Conversations need to happen, but because we as humans think a few steps ahead, we think, oh my gosh, if I say this, or if I counter think this, it's going to create waves and problems. And, we work, at least I did, worked in an organization where you don't rock the boat,
Mm-hmm.
right? You don't rock, don't create waves, don't create problems where there aren't any.
Mm-hmm.
But what that does is it stifles the organization, it stifles the people, it stifles innovation, right? So what needs to happen, so going to your question then, is most definitely there is a difference between good and bad conflict. So the way I think about it is this: good conflict is conflict that's productive, right? It challenges ideas respectfully, it fosters creativity, and it really pushes teams to think outside of the box, right? Again, conflict is good so long as it's productive. And so the type of conflict where people feel comfortable sharing different ideas because the organization or your team lead has created a space where you trust that by sharing something differently, you won't be harmed, that you'll be celebrated, that there will be conversation around your different opinions or the different perspective that you bring into the conversation that's happening, right? So that's good conflict, right? One that's based on that's productive. The opposite then becomes when is bad conflict, and that's one that you take personally, right? So bad conflict is one that we take personally, and it escalates into this blaming and defensiveness, right? You're not listening, instead you're defensive. They went against what I was thinking. I'm going to take that personally. Now I'm going to defend myself. So now you're emotionally entrenched in defending yourself rather than being open to listening to what the other people are saying, right? So good conflict is one that's productive, and bad conflict is one that we take personally, and one that then leads us to being defensive and almost blaming.
Sure.
Right?
Yeah.
And that's kind of, so what ends up happening, right? We're defensive, or we shut down, no more conversation, right? Or we get passive aggressive, right? So there's no chance of collaboration once we enter that area of bad conflict.
Yeah, I appreciate how you framed it the way you just did. I can't help but go to the leader's perspective. Not every leader has a you in the meeting with them that has the ability to pick up on these things and facilitate in real time. It's typically the leader, their direct or indirect team members, and you're grappling through real time issues. For that leader that's in the meeting and sensing some tension or some conversations that are necessary, how does that leader lean into conflict in a way that produces a productive outcome?
Yep, absolutely. I'm going to start by saying I think it is imperative that every individual, when they're onboarding, gets at least one training on conflict management, but much more than one. It is not a one and done, right? A lot of times people get promoted because they've been there a long time, right? They might know subject matter, They might understand the culture of the organization, but they may not have received training, right? Conflict management requires training. It just does, right? We don't wake up and say, I'm going to compartmentalize my emotion and not take criticism personally. It doesn't work that way, right? So going back to your question, a leader needs to recognize when things are going the wrong direction. But a way to even prevent that is to start meetings with community agreements that we're going to talk constructively, that we're going to, even if we're passionate about a topic, we're going to be respectful. We're not going to use the blame game. We're not going to say you, right? Those I statements that some of us might have learned about are powerful, right? And leaders need to recognize that. And leaders need to start meetings by setting up those agreements, right? And when things start to unravel in a negative direction, a leader can actually stop a meeting, or even anyone there can stop a meeting and say, listen, this is going in an unproductive direction. Let's take a break, right? And how can we tell? Not aside from tone and verbal cues, but we talk about nonverbal cues, right? Sitting with your arms folded, all of a sudden you were leaning forward in conversation and and then now you're sitting back and your arms are folded and your face is scrunched. Right there, something isn't jiving, something isn't happening, it's not connecting. And a leader needs to be aware of the nonverbal language that's happening. And then ask, hey, so I noticed this. Is there something that you want to share? Is everything simple as, is everything okay? Right? Let's take a break. I'm recognizing this body language. And you don't even have to call it an individual, even though people can all see it. But a leader can simply say, hey, so I'm kind of feeling a little tension starting to build. Let's take a break, regroup, and think about what the goal of this meeting is. We're not here to blame anyone. We're not here to find fault in anyone. We're here to resolve a matter. Or we're here to decide the direction of our project. Or we're here to have conversation about the next steps on our project, right? The leader can come back and pull everything back. Everyone takes a breath, step away for 5 minutes, and you've left them with the goal of what they're coming back to, which is the goal of next steps in our project, remembering that we're here to hear different opinions. We're not here for the blame game. So that's what they're leaving. That's the last thing they're hearing when they leave for their break, not whatever statement made them upset.
Yeah.
Right? So then you take a step back, and 5 minutes later, you come back. Right?
That is so practical what you just shared. I can't help but also recognize that to lean into that versus avoiding it requires courage on the part of the leader. It also requires time. And in cultures where you have back-to-back meetings, they're stacked on each other, and there's very little downtime, I can understand and have even been guilty and experienced how it's easy to recognize the need to call time out. But because of time constraints and pressures, you're like, let's just keep things moving, and you avoid it. I would love for you to give your perspective. You do this for a living, and what you shared practically can help leaders lean in. When do they recognize that it's time or that it's necessary to bring in a third party facilitator or someone like yourself that specializes in these types of matters?
Great question. But I also want to take one step back and respond to the statement that you just made. The fact that we're in this very busy culture, we don't have time for a timeout. I want leaders to think about what happens in the long run if you don't deal with the challenge early on. Right? So if you allow the fester, the buildup of the negative energy, the frustration buildup, what's going to happen at the next meeting? What energy comes to the next meeting?
Hmm.
You come back to the meeting, and now I'm looking at the person who I'm still upset with because I feel that they were blaming me for the lack of progress in that project. Right? So now I show up at part 2 of the meeting and I'm festering because I've not had the ability to share. We've not had the ability to unpack the challenge. So now that goes to the next meeting. And now I can't even get out of the gate in conversation. The leader can't even get the meeting going because no one wants to talk. Right?
Yeah.
So what you've done now is you've taken the challenge that maybe could have taken 10 or 15 minutes to resolve. I know it could be longer, but I'm saying, if we start early enough, it could potentially be a 10 or 15 minute, maybe a 20-minute conversation early on. But if you don't have that 10 or 15, 20-minute now moves over to the next meeting, which on top of the frustrations, now you've got maybe a 40, 45-minute conversation that has to happen, right? And now people are even more entrenched. So I say all that to say, yes, I absolutely acknowledge that we are in a fast-moving organization. Decisions have to be made quickly. Projects need to move forward as quickly as possible. But if we don't deal with the bad conflict that's festering, it's only going to get worse. Now, for me, that might be a good thing because then that's when you call me.
Fair.
Right?
Yes.
Right? That might be when you call me. But I don't want to put myself out of business here, but
it's okay.
But what you've done now is that you've created a more toxic environment that even when you do call someone in like me who has more experience in managing conflict, the challenge becomes more difficult. Right? And for companies that are looking at their bottom dollars, their bottom line and time and all of that, so instead of dealing with a challenge early on, now we've got to find time to bring in an expert. So we've got extra time there, extra money there, which again, I'm not trying to talk myself out of business here.
Yeah.
But I'm trying to what I'm trying to say is addressing conflict in its early stages gives you a higher percentage of continuing to build a less toxic work environment.
It makes sense. How much bottom line impact or additional expense or stifled innovation occurs across workplaces and organizations where at the root of it all is a conflict that wasn't addressed?
Exactly.
And
bingo.
Yeah, and I'll never forget a mentor of mine once shared that part of our obligation as a leader is to steward the environment of your team and of your organization. And that means mining for conflict and proactively looking for it where it may exist.
Absolutely. Now, I say all this, but the one caveat that I will say is if you are dealing with a narcissistic personality, that is a very different type of conflict and might be a part 2 conversation. But that's a very different one. And I always say we can only change ourselves. We have no control over anyone else. So even in conflict situations, it is what I am bringing to the table that's going to impact how things are moved forward, because I can't change you. But if I come with the right mindset of, I like the work I do, I have to continue working with these people, so I need to figure out how to mend a relationship. I need them to understand me, right, and what I'm bringing to the table. So I can only do that. I can't make you change, even by sharing these stories, right? Even by sharing all of these different things I just laid out. I can't change you. So
Hmm.
I have to then decide, is this still the best place for me to be?
Sure.
Right? And that could
Hmm.
be, let me go talk to the leader, let me go talk to HR, all the different steps that might be in the organization's setup, right?
Yeah.
Fine. But if at each turn I'm bringing my best to
Hmm.
the table and I'm bringing solutions and I'm acknowledging that
Hmm.
maybe I did take that personally. But at the same time, I didn't feel that the team was sitting in a positive environment, right?
Hmm.
That I didn't feel safe sharing. And now it's only proven because I shared and now I'm getting this negative feedback,
Hmm.
right? All I
Hmm.
can do is share my point of view,
Yeah.
right? And I also think so. Also going back to the fact that companies are busy, we've got project deadlines, so maybe leaders may not acknowledge in the moment,
Hmm.
but you have to come back. Don't let it go unaddressed,
Mm.
right? So, okay, this may not be the time. Let's table that for another discussion. Let's move forward as much as we can. Absolutely, because there's a deadline. Go back and schedule a time to go
Mm.
back to what happened, right?
Yeah.
Don't leave it alone. Don't say, oh, if I keep quiet, we'll just not go
Yeah.
back. That's the avoidance,
Yeah. It'll
right?
just
And
go
that's
away.
it. And it won't. It
Yeah.
only gets worse,
Mm.
right?
Yeah.
It's like a fire, right? I can put out a little fire that might come, blow it out, or even pat it out with something. But
Hmm.
if I sit back and I watch that fire, and now it goes to my curtains, now it goes on the roof, I can't put that
Mm.
out. So that's why we need to make sure that we deal with conflict,
Hmm.
especially the bad conflict that festers, as early on as possible.
That's such a great analogy. Putting out the fire early. I love that. I'm gonna borrow that. So that was
Please
really
do.
good.
We can thank my new awful obsession of that show called Station 19. It's
That's
all
why you
about
had.
firefighters and it's
Yeah.
on, I don't know, I watch it on Hulu, but I'm like,
It's all right.
okay.
I can think of worse obsessions. You're fine there. You're totally okay.
But
Some.
really at the end of the day,
Mm.
it's really reading that, feeling the energy that's
Mhm.
happening in the room.
Yeah.
That's going to help you determine if it's good conflict or bad conflict. Does it feel defensive, tense, maybe even stagnant, right? Like we're not moving forward in conversation. Like I said, are people getting quiet and pulling themselves back? All of that really is that shift that happens from a productive
Mhm.
conversation and productive conflict to something that's a bad conflict.
Got it. That makes
Yeah.
sense. I think about today, we're in an era where we have some of the most diverse workplaces that we've seen. And by diverse, I mean full stop. I'm talking
Mhm.
socioeconomically, ethnically, geographically, generationally, which I know that's a topic you're passionate about. In order to do conflict well, I can't help but think there's some necessary foundational elements that have to be in place in order to signal that it's even okay to engage in conflict. My thought being, without certain components, a leader can be effective, but if there's a culture where that's saying we don't value this type of engagement, or we value being nice, or we value whatever that looks like, it will be difficult for a team member to have the psychological safety to enter into conflict in the first place. So, in your professional opinion, what are some of the foundational elements in an organization to signal that conflict is okay?
That's a great heavy question. So what needs to happen, there's a lot, right? So the first thing that we need to think about is, is the organization set up to do conflict well?
Mm.
Right. And what I mean by that is going back to your statement around psychological safety. Have we created an environment
Mm-hmm.
where everyone feels respected,
Mm-hmm.
where you're allowed to share your voices and thoughts without fear of, what's the word, retaliation,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
right? Is it okay for me to say, no, I don't agree with that? But you can't stop there, right? The next statement should be something along the lines of, how about this? Or I
Mm-hmm.
haven't fully thought it through, but that just doesn't sit right with me. Are those kinds of statements and questions safe to say in your organization? And if they're not, that's the first place to start,
Okay.
is to make it okay to have those to make those statements, to say, either I don't understand what the goal is with that, with the thought process. Could you maybe repeat it in a different way?
Mm-hmm.
Or to say, listen, I think this is what I'm understanding, and and I don't believe that's the right way to go.
Mm-hmm.
Are you open to hearing something else? And then sharing that thought. So when you ask, is it okay for me to share something else? The response should be, yes, of course, please do.
Mm-hmm.
It shouldn't be, we have a deadline. No, let's move on.
Mm-hmm.
Right? That right there is the shift from potential good conflict
Mm-hmm.
to bad conflict. You hear it
Got
in the
it.
voices, you hear it in the stress of the time urgency. Acknowledge, yes, all these companies have the time urgency. And what I say is, when you're putting together your project schedule,
Mm-hmm.
build in the time
Mm.
for conversation, build in the time to hear diverse perspectives, build in that time to talk about good shifting over to bad conflict.
Mm-hmm.
Because if you build it in, then there's no excuse. It's already
Mm-hmm.
built in.
I love
Yeah,
those. You want to do something fun?
sure.
All right. So you know how when your car has issues, there are typically signs on your dashboard, warning indicators.
Hmm.
You don't have a full diagnostic, but it's just enough to let you know, hey, you need to look here. So you are our professional conflict miner. The leader is in the car driving his or her team forward, and they step into a meeting. For that leader, what are some of the signals that there's conflict for them to look for in conversations with their team? Rapid
Oh,
fire.
I
Rapid
love
fire.
it. I love it. Okay, of
Okay.
course, right? Body language, word usage, um, tone,
Mm-hmm.
right? All of those are really important, and you need to be aware of it. Um, Blaming words, right?
Mm-hmm.
So all of this is really around communication.
Okay.
That's the big crux of it. All of it is
Mm-hmm.
around communication. How are we
Mm-hmm.
communicating, right?
Mm-hmm.
So if there's like maybe the red stop sign that comes up, right? Like that's what hits the dashboard as
Mm-hmm.
your symbol that something isn't right, is the stop.
Mm-hmm.
And now let's read the room. So it's really communication. That's the first main thing I will always say, is understanding how each person communicates. I'm not quite sure how rapid fire that was.
That was good. It was rapid fire enough. That was really good. Okay. We are creeping up on the time where people watching this probably will want to get back to work.
Yes.
So, for leaders that are interested in doing conflict well, Suman, I know that you love helping people like this. So, tell us a bit about how they can get in touch with you and engage with you further.
Thank you so much. Thank you again. This is such a great conversation. I could probably spend another hour talking about this.
I know, and we have.
Yes,
Yeah.
we have.
Yeah.
So, of course, there's my website, which is
Mhm.
wellbalancedsolutions.com. So the website is there. My email address is suman@wellbalancedsolutions. And then, of course, you can find me on LinkedIn. So 3
Love
different
it.
ways that you can reach out to me. And even if it's just, can I pick your brain for 15 minutes? Sure, I'm willing to do that for 15 minutes, but I will also caveat that by 15 minutes most likely won't solve the issue.
You're probably right. Thank you so much for what you shared, the generosity with what you know and your heart for in helping organizations to be healthy and
Mhm.
well balanced. See what I did there? Thank you so much for the work that you do. And I look forward to the next conversation.
Anytime, anywhere, I'm in for it. Thank you, Dom.